following on from what I said last night, it appears big business, who spend half their time sucking up to government, are now starting to panic. What disgraceful leadership is evidenced from the corporate world almost always, mostly gutless sheep following the stupidity of government and frightened to open their mouth to condemn. When I spoke last Saturday, I referred to a piece by Bjorn Lomborg and Jordan Peterson, which argued, and I quote, "The meaningful exchange of truly diverse ideas and perspectives has withered over recent decades. We need to foster and promote critical thinking and constructive discussion." Now, I raised this with Bob Carr, the former Foreign Minister. Now, that's the last thing the left want. But the challenge seems to frighten off most Conservatives. Lomborg and Peterson argue, and I quote, "Consider the world's response to the COVID pandemic. A panic-stricken lockdown orthodoxy far too soon took hold, and those whose policy proposals deviated quickly were labelled COVID deniers." They went on, "Governments that went the farthest were feted by public intellectuals and in newspaper opinion pages. Thus, we saw increases of inequality in income distribution and wealth, widespread loss of employment, substantive declines in spending, except by government, general deterioration in economic conditions, serious declines in mental health and well-being, delayed and diminished access to healthcare, and record high levels of domestic violence. The education, they said, of children was particularly affected. School closures on average robbed children of more than 7 months of education. They said the huge impact on kids' knowledge could end up costing $17 trillion in lifetime earnings. Poor children, girls, and children with disabilities suffered the largest losses," unquote. And then this point, campaigners, and this is critical, isn't it, and news organisations plant fear. Now, I raised this with John Larter last night. Campaigners and news organisations plant fear in the form of floods and storms and droughts, while neglecting to mention the reductions in poverty and increases in resilience mean climate-related disasters kill even fewer people. They went on, "Over the past century, deaths have dropped 97%. They said heat waves capture the headlines. Globally, however, cold kills 9 times more people. They said the higher temperatures arguably characterising this century have resulted in 166,000 fewer temperature-related deaths overall." Lomborg and Peterson went on, "Fear-mongering and the suppression of truly inconvenient truths are pushing us dangerously towards the wrong solutions." They said politicians and pundits call en masse for net zero policies that will cost far beyond $100 trillion, while producing benefits a fraction as large, unquote. And rightly they say, we need to be able to have an honest discussion of costs and benefits, a true reckoning of the facts to find the best solutions, unquote. Now, it's almost laughable, isn't it? Quote, "An honest discussion of costs and benefits?" You're kidding me. When have we ever had that on coronavirus? Or on global warming, which has now disappeared from the language? It's now called climate change. Instead, a heap of nonsense that carbon dioxide, which is 0.04% of the atmosphere, could be so damaging us that we must close down coal-fired power stations, ban gas appliances, take petrol cars off the road. The madness is breathtaking. And as I've said many times, Chris Bowen, whom Terry McCrann rightly calls our national twerp-in-chief, this is Terry McCrann, with his, quote, "mad, bad and utterly insane campaign to destroy our electricity system," unquote. That's Terry McCrann. I've said Bowen is dangerous. Terry McCrann has made the point. If we shut down coal production and ban gas, quote, "I invite you to see the Bowen future playing out in real time right now in the UK, but with some, and for us, utterly disastrous differences. It was coming up for dawn." This is Terry McCrann telling the story of England. "It was coming up for dawn on Wednesday in the UK." That's last Wednesday. "Just over 24,000 megawatts of electricity was being demanded. And how much was the UK getting from wind and solar? Which, according to our local lunatic Bowen, will be our power future." This is Terry McCrann speaking. "According to the official electricityinfo.org website, all of 90 megawatts. Obviously, the sun wasn't shining. And right around the UK, both onshore and offshore, the wind was not blowing either. Terry McCrann went on. Wind in the UK has the laughably designated installed capacity of something like 15,000 megawatts. But occasionally the wind doesn't blow anywhere. And it gets effectively zero, a big fat zero, from all that very expensively installed capacity. He means wind turbines everywhere. So Terry McCrann asks, where does the other 23,900 megawatts come from? Well, they too have closed down coal-fired power. So they have 350 megawatts from that, but 14,700 megawatts from gas generation. We'll bring back Terry McCrann, quote, are we going to be building a fleet of gas-powered stations? Heck no. Bowen and other idiots, like Victorian Premier Chairman Dan, this is Terry McCrann, are even trying to turn off gas for direct household and industry use. The next biggest supply, around 4,100 megawatts, was nuclear. He says our itinerant PM has just firmly ruled out that future, unquote. Well, to compound the joke of what we're being fed about the tomorrow world of renewable energy, as Terry McCrann points out, they were still 3,000 megawatts short, 30 times what the entire wind and solar installations were supplying. So the other 3,000 megawatts were coming from extension cords into a number of European grids. So Terry McCrann asks, remind me please, Mr. Bowen, who are we going to plug our extension cords into? New Zealand? Indonesia? The moon? As I said at the outset, business now might wake up to their stupidity in endorsing this nonsense. We were told in the latest intergenerational report to be released tomorrow, Australia would have to find an extra $140 billion a year every year for the next 4 decades to pay for health, aged care, the NDIS, defence, and of course interest payments on the national debt. $140 billion a year every year for the next 40 years. Business is now trying to pretend that having set fire, along with government, to the national building, they then know how to put the fire out. You tell me one big business that's not supported net zero. Like The Voice, these people are damaging to the interests of people who have no voice. The Business Council would have you believe they've got a blueprint to secure the nation's future. I talked about tossers last week. Well, this is the umbrella under which tossers sit. The Business Council of Australia supporting The Voice, supporting net zero, doing nothing about the degraded education provided by universities, yet they can see these university products coming into their workplace every day. But business is too frightened to stick its head up and say we are heading in the wrong direction. Now they're saying, big business, we don't like these energy interventions. We need a fresh plan to hit ambitious green targets if we're going to achieve pollution cuts by 2035. So carbon dioxide is a pollutant, is it? What school did some of these people go to? It's an invisible gas that's the source of all plant life. And the hoax is that a gas, which is 0.04% of the atmosphere, requires us to stand our own economic well-being on its head. Get rid of gas, get rid of coal, legislate against nuclear, and you'll finish up, I'm telling you, with economic ruin. And the mob that have taken us down this path won't be here to be punished for their economic vandalism. Remember, as I've said often, Michael Schellenberger was a world-renowned environmental activist for 20 years. In his book, Apocalypse Never, you've got to read this, Why Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us All, he apologised in July 2020 for, quote, the climate scare we've created over the past 30 years. He said, quote, once you realise how badly misinformed we've been, it's hard not to feel duped. Professor Stephen Coonan, to whom I've spoken before, told me he could not get a major media interview in America about his book Unsettled. But this bloke was Barack Obama's chief scientist. In his book Unsettled, he wrote, leaders talk about existential threat, climate emergency, disaster, crisis, but in fact, when you actually read the literature, there is no support for that kind of hysteria. The science is insufficient to make useful projections, he says, about how the climate will change in coming decades, much less what effects human beings will have on it. Well, I'm saying to all Australians, you listen to what Terry McCrann calls our local lunatic Bowen. You can. I won't. I reminded the Conservative conference at the weekend of Joseph Goebbels, the German Nazi politician and minister for propaganda from 1933 to 1945, one of Hitler's closest and most devoted associates, who said, and I quote, If you tell a lie big enough and keep reporting it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and/or military consequences of the lie. It thus, this is Goebbels, becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus, by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. Unquote. We've reached the stage where the energy truth has to compete with the energy lies of Bowen and Co, politicians on both sides of the parliament. So the voter has to make sure that the energy truth wins.